called Lev Tahor, A Pure Heart by Zusha from their album Open the Gates that we've been working our way through. Great to be with you. Been having some technical difficulties tonight, and I apologize. I was a couple of minutes late getting on the air. Let's light up the darkness. All right, who is with us on a Tuesday evening? Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Stephen in New Hampshire, Nancy in North Carolina, Renee in Indiana, Guy in Ohio, James in Indianapolis, Bill in mid-Missouri, Paula in Chicago, Ruth in Kentucky, Zach Plotzker, always great to have you in the house from Nevada, Lucy in Minnesota, Bella in Florida, Leona Sue from Southern Illinois, Karen in Northern California, Shandor in the Bronx, Gwen in Michigan, Dorothy in Pittsburgh, Tom in Pennsylvania, Paul in the Great Northwest, Belle in Texas, Harold in Portland, Rochelle in Modesto. Over there on the YouTube side, Aoife in Ocala, Florida, Yitzhak in Kansas City, Marjorie, I'm pretty sure you're in Atlanta, right, in Georgia. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you here. Okay. So I titled tonight's show, We Walked Before We Crawled, because tonight we're doing, our page today is 29. We're starting toward the bottom of 28b with Mishna number 2 here in chapter 3. And this Mishna, it's kind of simpler than the ones we've been talking about the last few days, but it's really been a building block that we keep referring to these principles. And, you know, if the Gemara was organized, if the Mishnah was organized as a kind of, you know, gentle build, okay, you know, we crawl, then we walk, then we run. Let's get the simple steps and the simple tools and building blocks that are going to help us understand and process the more complex laws. If it was organized that way, we would have run into this Mishnah a lot sooner. But yeah, the Gemara is not organized that way. For the sages, it was kind of all of a piece. They had the whole tradition mastered and memorized. And so what they tended to be interested in was the most complex case to get people's attention, because then they're interested. And that's why often the more complicated and more obscure cases come first. But this Mishnah here, number 2 in chapter 3, having, you know, done that hard work of working our way through complex cases, hopefully as we hear this Mishnah and its nuances, it's going to feel almost a little bit like review for us. And because this material is so challenging, hopefully now we'll feel like, okay, I get it. You know, I get it. I'm comfortable in this kind of thinking. And processing the, you know, how the laws are applied in these various incidents and situations that come up where yibum is a possibility or possibly precluded. Okay, so let's get into it. Mishnah number 2. As we mentioned before, the first 2 chapters kind of laid out the laws, generally speaking. And here in chapter 3, we're applying those laws to specific situations. This is also that, but this is kind of like that kind of base situation that so many of these other cases have alluded to. Okay, so Mishnah number 2 in chapter 3. In the case of 3 brothers, 2 of whom were married to close relatives, for example, to 2 sisters. That's the case we keep talking about. But it would be the same result if the 2 brothers had married a mother and daughter, or a mother and her granddaughter even. Or a woman and her granddaughter through her son. In any case, the 2 brothers were married to 2 women who are close relatives of each other. If the 2 brothers who were married to these 2 close relatives died, and the easiest case is that they're married to 2 sisters, and their wives came before a 3rd brother for yibum, then these 2 women must perform chalitza and may not enter into yibum, as each of them is a relative of a woman, a close relative of a woman, with whom this man has a levirate bond. right? Before he performs either yibum or chalitza, he has an obligation to do one of those things, and that is what we mean by the levirate bond. And Rabbi Shimon exempts them even from the obligation to perform chalitza, because it must be that he considers that levirate bond really substantial, and it's like he's already married, to either one of the sisters with regard to the other, and therefore there's just not going to be a possibility of yibum or chalitza, so you don't need chalitza. Whereas according to the Mishna, the levirate bond is substantial, but not super substantial, and that's why they're going to require chalitza, but in any case, yibum is going to be off the table. If one of them was forbidden to him, the third brother, due to a prohibition against forbidden relatives, right? So let's say that the third brother is a paternal half-brother of the brothers who died, and through his mother's side, he's related to one of those two sisters. Maybe they are, maternal half-sisters. So he's related to one of the sisters, but not the other. Okay, so then the one he's related to, no yibum or chalitza possibility with her. Therefore, he doesn't have a levirate bond with her. And the other one, now he's free to perform chalitza or yibum. He could actually marry her as his brother's widow. In order to build up his brother's house. Obviously, this is all based on the presumption that the brothers who died, when they died, were childless, and that's why yibum kicks in to overcome what would otherwise be the prohibition on marrying your brother's sister, even your brother's widow. So, if one of them was forbidden to him, the third brother, due to a prohibition against forbidden relatives, then he is prohibited from marrying her, but is permitted to marry her sister. Because the woman who is forbidden to him is not considered to be a woman who requires him for levirate marriage at all. Therefore, there is only one woman who comes before him for levirate marriage, for yibum. However, if one of the women was forbidden due to a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah or a prohibition stemming from sanctity, then they must perform chalitza and may not enter into levirate marriage. And this is because these prohibitions do not completely cancel the levirate bond. And just to review, so if one of the women was prohibited from him by a forbidden relation, right? So it would create an incestuous relationship. If he married her, then there's no yibum or chalitza possibility, and he may marry her sister with whom he doesn't have that relationship. If one of those women is prohibited to him, or one or both of them, through this prohibition related to a mitzvah or a prohibition relating to sanctity, then that's not as strong a prohibition as if she's prohibited to him through one of the incestuous relationships listed in the Torah. And so to review, what was a prohibition related to a mitzvah? That means she's prohibited to him by rabbinic decree, meaning the secondary prohibited relationships, not the ones listed in the Torah, but still familial relationships that are close to the prohibited relationships, and therefore the rabbis decreed that those would also be prohibited. Doesn't rise to the level of a Torah prohibition, it's a rabbinic prohibition, and therefore he can't marry her. But because it's a rabbinic decree rather than a Torah prohibition, it doesn't completely toss out the levirate obligation, and that's why chalitza is going to be necessary, even though yibum is off the table. And a prohibition due to sanctity, this is like a Kohen Gadol can't marry a widow of any sort. He can only marry a virgin. Or a priest can't marry a divorced woman, and that includes a chalutza, a woman who has already gone through a chalitza ceremony to remove her yibum obligation. When one husband died, then she came before a brother, then she performed chalitza with that brother in order to be free, and then maybe another circumstance in her life happens and she falls again before a priest for yibum, but she's not permitted to him because she is a chalutza, one who has had chalitza. Okay, that's Mishnah number 2. Now the Gemara. It is taught in a baraisa, Rabbi Shimon exempts both of them from chalitza and from yibum. as it is stated, and you shall not take a woman to her sister to be a rival to her. That's the prohibition that keeps coming up, and from which so many of these laws are based. But the simple meaning is you cannot marry a woman and her sister. You can't even marry a woman, divorce that woman, and then marry her sister. Her sister will remain prohibited to that man until the one who he was first married to dies. You can marry a woman's sister after that woman dies, but as long as she's alive, even if you're divorced, you cannot marry her sister. And you certainly can't marry a woman and her sister at the same time if we're talking about a period in history where where bigamy is permitted, right? Where you can have multiple wives. Even then, you cannot marry a woman and her sister because that's a Torah prohibition. And this indicates that at the time that a situation arises wherein they are to become rival wives to each other, for example, two sisters come before one Yavam, one surviving brother, for yibum, you shall not have the ability to take even one of them in marriage. In his opinion, Rabbi Shimon's opinion, both women are exempt from yibum and chalitza at the moment that they come before the Yavam at the same time. If two sisters come before a Yavam, already yibum, chalitza, all off the table. They're exempt and they can just go their separate ways. They are freed from that obligation, according to Rabbi Shimon. At the moment that they come before the Yavam, just as a forbidden relative is exempt from both levirate marriage and chalitza, so too, two sisters that come before the same Yavam together create the same condition. And it was taught in the Mishnah, if one of them was forbidden to him due to a prohibition against forbidden relatives, he is prohibited from marrying her, but is permitted to marry her sister. And the Gemara asks, why do I need this statement as well? This is identical to that which was taught in the previous Mishnah, where there were two brothers, two sisters, and then two surviving brothers. And the Gemara answers, it was necessary to state this again here, according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. It might enter your mind to say, since Rabbi Shimon said that two sisters may not perform chalitza and may not enter into yibum, as the very fact that they require yibum from the same man and stand to become rival wives to each other renders them forbidden, therefore we should issue a rabbinic decree in this case as well. Although in this case only one of the sisters is eligible for yibum, as the other is a forbidden relative to the Yavam, to the surviving brother, perhaps there should be a rabbinic decree prohibiting the Yavam from marrying the permitted sister due to the similarity to the case of two sisters in general who come before him for yibum, and one of them doesn't happen to be prohibited. Since it's similar to that case, maybe we should say, even if one of them is prohibited as a forbidden relative, still we should prohibit him from marrying the sister that is permitted because of the similarity to the case of when just two sisters come up before him and one is not prohibited. And this teaches us that even Rabbi Shimon does not hold that there is such a rabbinic decree in this case. And it was taught in the Mishnah that if the wives are forbidden to the Yavam due to a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, meaning one of the secondary prohibited relationships by rabbinic decree, and it is a mitzvah to listen to the sages about their decrees, that's why it's called a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, or a prohibition resulting from sanctity, right? That the Kohen Gadol can't marry a widow, and any priest can't marry a divorced woman, which includes a chalutza. Well, they must perform chalitza and may not enter into levirate marriage. Now we're on 29a. This law was also taught in the previous Mishnah, Mishnah number 1 of chapter 3. And it is cited in this Mishnah according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. The Gemara asks, but didn't Rabbi Shimon say two sisters neither perform chalitza nor enter into yibum? Because these women are eligible for yibum according to Torah law, they are considered the sisters of a woman with whom he has a levirate bond. So in this case, Rabbi Shimon exempts them from both chalitza and yibum. Why then does the Mishnah require them to perform chalitza? They should just be completely exempt. Why chalitza? And the Gemara answers, it is a rabbinic decree due to the general case of a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah. If they did not perform chalitza in this case, where they are sisters, there is a concern that people would assume that their exemption from chalitza stemmed not from their status as sisters, but rather due to the prohibition. And this would lead to the mistaken conclusion that women who are forbidden due to a mitzvah do not require chalitza. Therefore, the sages issued a rabbinic decree requiring chalitza, right? So if you're prohibited to the yavam because of a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, meaning there's not a prohibited relationship, but there's a secondary prohibited relationship, one of those relationships like a father's aunt or something, that the sages said is prohibited, but the Torah did not list explicitly. So then, prohibited by rabbinic decree, not by Torah written law, in that case, she can't marry the Yavam, but because it's not one of the specific laws stated in the Torah, they are going to require chalitza. She's not fully exempt. Yibum off the table, chalitza required. And because that is the case, whenever there's this prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, so even in the case of two sisters, they're going to require the chalitza, where you might have thought that since there's two sisters, they could have been exempt. And the Gemara asks, well, this works out well for her, as she is forbidden due to the prohibition resulting from a mitzvah. It is appropriate to require chalitza with her, to demonstrate that chalitza is generally applied in cases where there is a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah. But with regard to her sister, what is there to say? Why must she perform chalitza? And right, because the sister is not prohibited to the yavam by this prohibition resulting from a mitzvah. She's just the sister of a woman who's in that situation. So why does this sister have to perform chalitza? And the Gemara answers, there is a rabbinic decree with regard to her sister due to her. So the Gemara asks, well, if Rabbi Shimon issues a decree in this case requiring chalitza for the sister out of concern for confusion, well, then we have a difficulty. But with regard to a forbidden relative, we do not issue a decree requiring chalitza due to her sister. Why does Rabbi Shimon issue a rabbinic decree requiring chalitza with a woman forbidden due to a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah, not with a woman who is a forbidden relative? And the Gemara answers, forbidden relatives are different, as people learn the laws pertaining to them because they are stated explicitly in the Torah. And so those laws are well known, and the ruling has publicity. Therefore, there is no concern that people will mistakenly confuse this case with cases of Yevamos who are not sisters. Prohibitions resulting from a mitzvah are not, however, explicit in the Torah, nor are they generally known, and so the sages felt the need to issue that decree as a fence around the Torah to protect people from coming to make that transgression. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Now, Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 3. In the case of 3 brothers, 2 of whom were married to 2 sisters, and 1 who was single, the following occurred. The husband of one of the sisters died childless, leaving behind his wife, and the single brother performed levirate betrothal. Right? Again, betrothal is not necessary. This was a simple case, more or less. Maybe we could just sketch this one out. Bang, 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 bang. Okay, so we have 3 brothers, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. Okay, and they're married to 2 sisters, right? Reuven is married to Miriam, and Shimon is married to Dinah. Okay, and Levi is single. All right, so now Shimon dies. So that means that, and he dies childless. So now Dinah could come before either Reuven or Levi for yibum or chalitza. Now they're sisters, so no possibility with Reuven. So, but she could come as a Yevama before Levi. Now you might ask, since she's already, this is her sister, right? I think they said that he's married to 2 sisters, right? And so if she has this levirate obligation with Reuven, which is even a little stronger if he's the oldest brother, so you might say already because she has a levirate bond with a man who's married to her sister, maybe she's fully exempt already. Okay, maybe. But in fact, what happened was she looked to Levi. And Levi said, I will marry you. But he didn't perform yibum with her. He made this betrothal, levirate betrothal. Okay, that's the situation. So then what? So the husband of one of the sisters dies childless, that's Shimon, leaving behind his wife. And the single brother performed levirate betrothal with her. Very good. Performed an act of betrothal to the Yevama, but he did not yet consummate the marriage by engaging in sexual intercourse. Afterward, the second brother died, and therefore the second brother's wife, the sister of the betrothed, happened before the single brother for levirate marriage as well. Okay, so now Reuven dies. All right, now, Levi has more than a levirate bond. He has an actual betrothal with Dinah. And now Miriam, who is sisters with Dinah, right, would come before Levi as a Yevama, and he is the Yevam. Now he's already not only with a bond to Dinah, but even a betrothal, so he's technically married to Dinah, even though they haven't consummated it. So now the question, I guess, about Miriam is, does she require, no way she can marry him, right? But is it chalitza, or is she just exempt because of this relationship? So the single brother performed the act of betrothal to the Yevama, but did not yet consummate the marriage. The second brother died, and therefore the second brother's wife, the sister of the betrothed, happened before the single brother for levirate marriage as well. In this case, Beis Shammai say his wife remains with him. Beis Shammai say, well, this came up, so what we're going to say is, well, Dinah remains his wife. Okay, they're betrothed, and she's going to become his full wife. The woman he betrothed is considered like his wife, and he is not required to divorce her. And this other woman leaves the Yavam and is exempt from levirate marriage as the sister of a wife. Right, so she doesn't require chalitza or yibum. She's simply free to go her happy way, and this relationship is not a relationship. That's according to Beis Shammai. But Beis Hillel say, being as Levi did not yet consummate this betrothal with Dinah, being as he had not yet entered into marriage with the first woman, he is required to perform levirate marriage with both women. He has a yibum obligation to both Dinah and Miriam, and they are sisters, and that is problematic. Therefore, he divorces Dinah. He has to give her a bill of divorce, a get, because of that betrothal. So he divorces his wife, i.e. the woman to whom he performed levirate betrothal, with a bill of divorce, a get, which nullifies this levirate betrothal, and by chalitza, because he has this yibum obligation to sisters, so now he has to give her chalitza, which nullifies the levirate bond. And he sends away the wife of his second brother with chalitza as well. This is also going to be a chalitza and not a yibum. And they comment, and this is the case that was referred to when the sages said, woe unto him for his wife, and woe unto him for the wife of his brother. Because due to the combination of circumstances, he loses them both. Because he hadn't already completed this marriage, if he had just made yibum with her in the first place, she would be fully his wife, and then Miriam would go her separate way. But because he had only done this levirate betrothal with her, it was not a full marriage, so there was still a yibum obligation, and now there's two sisters that have a yibum obligation, and so he has to perform a get with her, right, to end the betrothal, and chalitza with Miriam, and he can't marry either one of them in this unfortunate circumstance, or fortunate, depending on what their emotional situation was. At any rate, the Gemara asks, what does the Mishnah's formulation of the term "this is," which indicates limitation and exactitude, come to exclude? Whenever the Gemara says this is the case of such and such, it also implies that something else is excluded. So now the Gemara is asking what was excluded. And the Gemara answers, it excludes that statement of Rabbi Yehoshua, which we're going to encounter on page 109. There, Rabbi Yehoshua holds that if a man is married to a minor, when her sister happens before him for yibum, he must send both of the women away. And he said there, woe unto him for his wife, and woe unto him for the wife of his brother. Now, from the language in the Mishnah here, we learn that we do not act in accordance with his opinion. Rather, we act in accordance with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, or in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. According to the opinion of both of these rabbis in the Mishnah on page 109, despite the conflict between the brother's marriage to the minor and the levirate bond with her sister, there is still a way for him to marry one of the women. Whereas here, he has to send them both away. Right there was a case of a minor and a betrothal that had already occurred. Here, there's a betrothal that comes in a yibum situation, and that seems to be the distinction. Now, with regard to the main issue of levirate betrothal, it would seem from this Mishnah that Beis Shammai hold the levirate betrothal has the legal force of levirate marriage. Right? According to Beis Shammai, when Levi and Dinah had a levirate betrothal, she was before him for yibum, so he betrothed her and said, I will marry you, but he just hadn't done it yet. So according to Beis Shammai, that's like they're married. They're married. And so when Miriam's husband died and she comes here for yibum, Levi's already married to her sister, so she's just free to go. So according to Beis Shammai, levirate betrothal equals levirate marriage. However, Rabbi Elazar said, do not say that levirate betrothal acquires the woman as a full-fledged acquisition according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, such that the first woman becomes his wife to the extent that if he wants to divorce her, a bill of divorce would suffice without an act of chalitza. Rather, for Beis Shammai, levirate betrothal acquires the woman only insofar as it precludes a rival wife from entering levirate marriage. The legal force of levirate betrothal is limited to preventing the rival wife of the sister from performing yibum. She is exempt from both levirate marriage and chalitza. But he would still have to perform chalitza if he was going to... Now when he sends her away, the get is not enough. Right? If they were fully married, if they had performed yibum, and then they decided to divorce, then chalitza would not be required, just the get would be. But since there was only levirate betrothal, if they want to terminate that, both the get, the bill of divorce, and chalitza would be required. Now, Rabbi Avin said, we too learn in the Mishnah proof that levirate betrothal is not a full-fledged act of acquisition, even according to Beis Shammai. The Mishnah at the beginning of this chapter, right on 26, Mishnah number 1, teaches that when two sisters who are Yevamos happen before two brothers for yibum, if the brothers married their wives before consulting the court, then Beis Shammai say they may keep them as their wives. And from here it can be deduced, if they already married them, yes, they may keep the wives. However, marrying them ab initio, no, this is prohibited due to the prohibition against marrying the sister of a woman with whom one has a levirate bond. Now we're on 29b. And if it enters your mind that according to Beis Shammai, levirate betrothal acquires the woman as a full-fledged acquisition, then this matter could potentially have been resolved ab initio. This brother should perform levirate betrothal and acquire one sister, and that brother should perform levirate betrothal and acquire the other sister. As there is no prohibition whatsoever involved in performing levirate betrothal, the concern for violating a prohibition by consummating the levirate marriage with a sister of a woman with whom one has a levirate bond would be avoided. He only betroths her, but does not engage in sexual intercourse with her. And after the betrothal, the levirate bond of her sister is dissolved, and then he can freely consummate the levirate marriage with her. But that doesn't work. The Gemara objects. Rather, what then? If levirate betrothal does not serve to fully acquire the woman, and by the way, when we say acquire, we're not, speaking of women as chattel, or slaves or something. The reason that verb is used, acquire, is not really a matter of property law, but rather that when we get to like kiddushin and how do you make a marriage, the verb that's used is acquire, simply because they're going to be like the act of, in modern times we exchange rings, right? But in ancient times, only the woman got a ring, right? And so he gave her the ring and he acquired a wife, not as a matter of personal property, but that's just the sort of term of art, the legal terms that are used for this. At any rate, acquire means marry. Okay, so again, the Gemara objects. Rather, what then? If levirate betrothal does not serve to fully acquire the woman, what is the alternative? It must be that according to Beis Shammai, levirate betrothal precludes the rival wife from entering levirate marriage with a complete preclusion. If so, there is an additional potential scenario. This one should perform levirate betrothal with one sister and preclude the second sister from entering levirate marriage. And that brother should perform levirate betrothal with the second sister and preclude the first sister from entering into levirate marriage. In this way, the Yevamim, the surviving brothers, can consummate the yibum with the sisters ab initio as well. Yet the Mishnah does not allow for that possibility. Rather, what do you have to say? One must assert that levirate betrothal performed in circumstances where it is permitted to perform yibum, i.e. where there is no prohibition with regard to the close relative of a woman with whom the yavam has a levirate bond, completely precludes the rival wife from entering yibum. And that makes sense, because when a man dies who has multiple wives, the surviving brother is only going to perform yibum with one of them. And when he performs yibum with one of them, or chalitza with one of them, then the co-wives, the rival wives, are exempt from both yibum and chalitza. We know this. However, levirate betrothal performed in circumstances where it is forbidden to perform levirate marriage does not preclude entering levirate marriage. Therefore, in the case of two sisters who happen simultaneously before two brothers for yibum, the sisters cannot be precluded from entering levirate marriage via levirate betrothal. So too, here, with regard to levirate betrothal, performed by the third brother, the same distinction can be made. Even according to the one who said that levirate betrothal acquires a woman as a full-fledged acquisition, just like marriage, there is the following difference. Levirate betrothal, under permitted circumstances, acquires the woman. But levirate betrothal under forbidden circumstances does not acquire the woman. Therefore, there is no proof as to the nature of levirate betrothal according to the opinion of Beis Shammai from the first Mishnah in the chapter. Now, Rav Ashi teaches this lesson in a different way. He says, Rabbi Elazar said, do not say that according to Beis Shammai, levirate betrothal precludes entering levirate marriage as a complete preclusion, so that the rival wife of the woman who received levirate betrothal does not require even chalitza. Rather, it precludes entering levirate marriage and yet leaves a remnant of the levirate bond in place. Accordingly, levirate betrothal precludes the rival wife's entering levirate marriage to the degree that the yavam is not required to divorce the woman he betrothed, but the levirate bond with the rival wife remains to the extent that he must still perform chalitza with her. Rabbi Avin said, we too learned this statement from the Mishnah where it states, Beis Shammai say, they may maintain them as their wives. And from here it can be deduced, yes, they may maintain them as their wives after the fact. No, they are not allowed to marry them ab initio. And if it enters your mind to say that according to Beis Shammai, levirate betrothal precludes entering levirate marriage as a complete preclusion, then this brother should perform levirate betrothal and preclude one sister from levirate marriage, and the other brother should perform levirate betrothal and preclude the first sister from levirate marriage, and then everybody will be all set. And the Gemara challenges this conclusion, but didn't the Mishnah teach that Beis Shammai say his wife remains with him, and this other is sent away due to her status as the sister of his wife? And this indicates that she is exempt from levirate marriage and does not even require chalitza. Rather, one must resolve this by asserting that a Yevama who is suitable for all of the aspects of levirate marriage is also suitable for part of it. If a Yevama, the widow, is eligible for both yibum and chalitza when she comes before the Yevama, the Yevamim, the surviving brothers, as in the case cited in the Mishnah we're talking about right now, where the woman who happened before the third brother was permitted to enter into levirate marriage, she is eligible for part of it. And this indicates that if the Yavam does not take her in levirate marriage but performs only levirate betrothal, the levirate betrothal has sufficient legal force to preclude the rival wife completely. However, a Yevama who is not suitable for all the aspects of levirate marriage is also not suitable for part of it. If the Yevam is not eligible for levirate marriage, such as in the case referred to in the first Mishna of this chapter, where both women happen simultaneously, so that the Yevam is not permitted to consummate the yibum with either woman, so then she is not suitable for part of it. And in that case, if the Yavam performs levirate betrothal, it does not have the legal force to effect a total preclusion. With regard to Beis Shammai's opinion about levirate betrothal, Rabbah asks, does levirate betrothal, according to the opinion of Beis Shammai, create a full-fledged marriage bond, or does it merely create betrothal, similar to other acts of betrothal? And Abaye said to him, with regard to what halacha are you asking? Right? So this is what we're seeing over and over again. Sometimes levirate betrothal is strong enough to preclude either chalitza or yibum with a co-wife, and sometimes it's not. So if we say it pertains to inheriting from her when she dies, and to becoming ritually impure for her if he is a priest, and to nullifying her vows, all of which are rights and obligations acquired by marriage, well, this is difficult. Now, with regard to a betrothed woman in general, i.e. a woman who was betrothed by Torah law, Rabbi Chia teaches in a Baraisa, one does not enter acute mourning on the day of death of his betrothed wife, nor can he become ritually impure for her if he is a priest. And similarly, she does not enter acute mourning for him and is not obligated to become ritually impure for him, because betrothal, even though it requires a get, a bill of divorce to break it, nevertheless, it is not at the same level of union as a full-fledged marriage. And that's why a priest does not become impure. I mean, he doesn't enter the cemetery for his betrothed wife the way he would for his full-fledged wife. If she dies, he does not inherit from her. If he dies, she collects the payment of her marriage contract. In the case where he performed only levirate betrothal with her, it is necessary to say that he does not inherit from her, nor does he become ritually impure for her. Therefore, this law is obvious, and Rabbah's question seems superfluous. Rather, the question must relate to the matter of delivery of the woman to the husband under a wedding canopy, the chuppah, when they actually get married. What is the ruling with regard to this? Is the Yavam obligated to enter the chuppah in the manner that he would with any other betrothed woman or not? This is the dilemma. Does levirate betrothal create a full-fledged marriage bond whereby the Yevama would not require further delivery to a wedding canopy? He doesn't have to stand under the chuppah with her. Once there's levirate betrothal, they're married. Or does levirate betrothal perhaps create only betrothal, whereby she would require delivery to a chuppah? And it's interesting because, as we've learned before, if it's just the levirate bond, right, meaning his brother dies and the widow is before him, they could just sleep together, right, to perform the mitzvah of having sex in order to build up his brother's house, for the purpose of creating a child that would be the heir of the brother who died without a child. And now, once they have that sex, they're married. They don't need to stand under the chuppah. But because there's delicate feelings involved, or they didn't understand the law so well, or for whatever other reason, they said, you know what, we'll take the path of a regular courtship process. First we get betrothed, then we stand under the chuppah. But because it was a levirate obligation, how does that intersect with the betrothal and marriage process? Abaye said to him that this question is not necessary as well. Now, if he did not perform levirate betrothal with her at all, it is written, his brother-in-law will have intercourse with her, Deuteronomy 25:5. And it is deduced from this verse that he can take her even against her will. Is it necessary to say that if he performed levirate betrothal with her, even without a wedding canopy, that he is allowed to engage in sexual intercourse with her? Why wouldn't he be allowed to engage in sex with her if he was already allowed? And Rabbah said to him, this question is relevant, as I say, that anyone who performs levirate betrothal with his Yevama causes the levirate bond to be removed from him. Now that's a surprise. They have an obligation to perform yibum or chalitza, Instead, they perform betrothal where they're planning to get married. They become betrothed to each other. And this would remove the yibum obligation. And he is no that this so Rabbah said this question is relevant, as I say, that Rabbah says anyone who performs levirate betrothal with his yavama causes the levirate bond to be removed from him, and he's no longer considered subject to the halachas of levirate marriage. Instead, a standard bond of betrothal applies to him. Therefore, it is appropriate to ask if this act of levirate betrothal is similar to a standard betrothal, insofar as the wedding canopy is concerned, and consequently, the woman would be required to stand under the chuppah with him in order to be fully married. Alternatively, perhaps the halachas of levirate marriage still apply somewhat, in which case the woman would not be required to enter the chuppah in order to become married, similar to a standard yavama to whom levirate betrothal was not performed. Now, does the performance of levirate betrothal weaken the capacity of intercourse to establish levirate marriage on its own? What is the halachic ruling here? The Gemara suggests, come in here and answer from what is taught in the Mishna at Nidarim 74a. So Nidarim is the law of vows, the tractate about the law of vows. What is the ruling with regard to the nullification of vows for a widow who is waiting for her yavam? Now, you generally have a law in the Torah that if a man makes a vow before God, so he's held to that vow unless he goes to a sage who can release him from that vow. If a woman makes a vow, if she's living in her father's house, she can go to her father and he can nullify the vow. Or if he doesn't, then she goes to a sage. And a wife, her husband can nullify her vow for her for a certain amount of time, same with the father. And then if they don't do it, then the vow stands and they have to go to a sage. So women have an extra option to get out of a vow that men don't have. Now that's for a wife and a husband. Right? So what about when she's a yavama with a levirate bond to her yavam, or if there's been a levirate betrothal, can this yavam or this fiancé, as it were, nullify her vows for her or not? That's what they're discussing. So what is the ruling with regard to the nullification of vows for a widow who is waiting for her yavam, whether she is waiting for a single yavam or two yavamim, right? Because there's one surviving brother or two surviving brothers. Rabbi Eliezer says, let him nullify her vows. The yavam may nullify her vows as though he were her husband. Rabbi Yehoshua says this holds true only if she is bonded to a single yavam, because there's only one yavam with who she has a potential relationship, so it's like he's her husband. But if there were two surviving brothers, either one of them could perform yibum or chalitza with her. So how strong is the bond really with any one of them? Not strong enough for him to nullify her vows, according to this ruling from Tractate Nidarim. But with two Rabbi Lazar says let him nullify the vows. Rabbi Yehoshua says this is true only if she is bonded to a single yavam, but not to two. Rabbi Kiva says it does not hold true. Neither to one yavam nor two yavamim, they may not nullify her vows because it's not her husband, according to Rabbi Kiva. And we discussed this issue, interpreting the various opinions. Granted, Rabbi Kiva holds that the levirate bond is not substantial, even in the case of one yavam. In his opinion, the levirate obligation, just the obligation to perform yibum, does not create a marriage bond at all, even if there is only a single yavam, and so how could he nullify her vows? And according to Rabbi Yehoshua, the levirate bond with one yavam is substantial, and so he could nullify her vows. The yavam undoubtedly requires this yavam for levirate marriage, and therefore she is considered to be like his wife. That's why he can nullify vows. But with two yavamim, the levirate bond is not substantial, since it is not clear to which brother will consummate the levirate marriage with her. Therefore, if there's two yevamim, neither one can nullify her vows. However, Rabbi Eliezer, if he indeed holds that the levirate bond is substantial, his opinion is difficult. Granted, if there's one yavam, he can nullify her vows. But if there are two, why should only one of them suffice to nullify her vows, as it is not yet clear which one of them will eventually marry her? And Rabbi Ami Bar Ahava said, with what are we dealing here? This is a case where one of them performed levirate betrothal with her, and this is in accordance with the opinion of Beis Shammai, who say levirate betrothal acquires her as a full-fledged acquisition, in other words, a full-fledged wife, and therefore she can go to him once they've been betrothed, and he can nullify her vows. But prior to the betrothal, no, he cannot nullify her vows. This interpretation can resolve Rabba's question. Granted, if you say levirate betrothal creates full-fledged marriage, it is due to the reason that the Yavam can nullify her vows just as a full-fledged husband does. However, if you say that levirate betrothal merely creates betrothal, how can he nullify the vows? One who is merely betrothed cannot nullify the vows of his betrothed. Even in standard cases of betrothal by Torah law, this husband cannot nullify her vows. For didn't we learn in the Mishna, with regard to a betrothed young woman, only her father and her husband together can nullify her vows. How could a Yavam nullify the vows without the father of the Yavama if he is not considered her full-fledged husband? And Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak said that this proof can be rejected by interpreting the Mishnah like this. What is the meaning of the phrase, he nullifies? It means that he nullifies her vows only in conjunction with her father. And the Gemara questions the reading of the Mishnah. And according to the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, who said that for Beis Shammai, levirate betrothal acquires the woman only insofar as it precludes a rival wife from entering levirate marriage, and it is not a full-fledged acquisition, why should the Yavam nullify her vows, even if he does so in conjunction with the father? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Eliezer could have said to you, one can say, that when I said that levirate betrothal acquires the woman only insofar as it precludes the rival wife from entering levirate marriage, it was to emphasize that a bill of divorce would not suffice for her, but rather she also requires chalitza. The betrothal, was optional, wasn't really necessary, needlessly complicated the situation. You did it, okay. So now if you're going to part company, you need a bill of divorce. But the yibum obligation, it was still there. The betrothal didn't remove it. So in addition to the get to nullify the betrothal, you need chalitza to nullify the levirate bond. She also requires chalitza. However, with regard to the matter of nullifying her vows, do we say that levirate betrothal is not effective and that he cannot nullify her vows alone? We didn't say that. And if you wish, say an alternative explanation. Rabbi Elazar could have said to you, and as for Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, does this resolution that the Mishnah is only referring to a case where the father and the Yavam can nullify her vows together, does that actually work out well? Did the Mishnah teach that they can nullify her vows? It teaches that he can nullify her vows in the singular, implying that he nullifies the vows alone and not in conjunction with anyone else. Rather, the Mishnah must be explained differently. With what are we dealing here? It is a case where the Yavam, regardless of whether or not he performed levirate betrothal, did not want to consummate yibum with her or perform chalitza. Therefore, the Yavama stood in court so as to compel him to consummate the yibum or perform chalitza so that she would be free. And it ruled that he must supply her sustenance. Because she is bound to him and cannot marry another, the court ruled that he was responsible for her livelihood until he either married her, in which case he would be responsible for her sustenance forever, or perform chalitza so that she would be free to go marry someone else. Until he does that, he has to, feed and clothe her, etc. And this is in accordance with the statement that Rav Pinchas, and I'm almost done. If you have questions or comments, get them in. And this is in accordance with the statement that Rav Pinchas said in the name of Rava. As Rav Pinchas said in the name of Rava, any woman who makes a vow makes her vow with the consent of her husband. Because she is dependent upon her husband for her livelihood, she does not act without his consent. In this case, because the Yavam is responsible to supply the Yavama with sustenance, it is assumed that her vows are also made with his consent. It is for this reason that he can nullify her vows without her father. Consequently, no conclusive proof can be derived from here with regard to the strength of acquisition to full-fledged marriage through levirate betrothal. And that actually ends the discussion. And tomorrow, with God's help, we'll pick it up with Mishnah number 4, right at the top of page 30a. Okay. Let's see if we have any questions or comments on page 29, here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud. Let's go. Where are the questions? Hold on, I have to reacquire the Google Doc with which Nina passes me questions. Here we go. Lucy, I am struck by the seemingly large number of young men in that society who died young without a child in a huge variety of family structures. Wondering if most of these losses were due to war, hence the urgency and importance of levirate marriage in those times. You know, Lucy, I don't think that's what's happening. Just like the Mishna will spend much more time in other contexts discussing the case of the tumtum or the androgynos, right, which are the third and fourth genders in the Talmud. There's male, there's female, there's the androgynos, sometimes called the hermaphrodite, right, which has characteristics of both male and female, and the tumtum, which has characteristics neither of male or female. Now, a hermaphrodite, or somebody, you know, whose sex organs are covered up or not present, like that is so rare that it never, you know, almost never happens. Why would the Mishnah spend a lot of time discussing those cases? Because the law is clear when there's a male or where there's a female. But when you're not sure what the gender is, you know, that's where it becomes an interesting case. And so they will spend a lot of time discussing it. So it's not that these hypothetical cases come up so often, it's that they become the interesting case, right? Because, I mean, first of all, there is the law of yibum. So it's in the Torah, so it needs to be spelled out. Why do they keep coming up with one case after another where this man died childless or two brothers died childless? Simply because if that happened, what would the law be? They're working it out. And as they sort of put pressure on the hypothetical incidents by making them more complicated, by making them, you know, a highly unlikely thing happen, not because it happens so often in real life, but just because if it were to happen, it would create a very challenging legal question. So they're going to go and explore that because they want to really understand what God's will for us would be in every situation, even every hypothetical situation, and it's almost irrelevant to them whether it ever happened in real life or not. They're still going to ask the question because it becomes a challenging, you know, legal question. And when the sages are discussing legal questions, they're not only doing that so that they would know how to rule when the case comes up. The very act of inquiry and analysis and figuring out what God's will would be in this, you know, bizarre, you know, far-fetched real-world incident, or let's say hypothetical incident, the act of digging in and figuring out the answer is a form of divine service, right? Because we're working through what the Torah wants us to, what God wants us to do through Torah laws that weren't spelled out clearly for these bizarre situations, as we engage in this process, and as you and I engage in it now, this is a form of divine service. And that's why that's why sort of the highest form of Torah study is Torah study lishma, just in the name of heaven. Not because somebody comes to us and needs a ruling, which of course is very holy and important, but when we're studying it just for the sake of understanding what God wants from us, this is a form of divine service, like prayer, like singing, like doing mitzvahs. I mean, singing to God, praising God. This is a form of holy service that we're engaged in now. Tom Beck is trying to understand the meaning of acquire a woman. Sounds bad to modern ears. Does this simply mean acquires the obligation to take care of her? Did they see it as a transaction or as more of an obligation? I mean, they call it an acquisition, but obviously a woman does not have the status of a slave. There was slavery. Tragically, there was slavery in ancient times. But so you could acquire a human being as a slave. But when you acquire a wife, it's not as your property. What it really means, though, is yes, you acquire the obligation to care for her, which is removed from her father, right? So she leaves her father's house and goes to her husband's house. And the obligation for her care passes to the husband. So you phrase that very well, Tom. Tom, if one Yavam marries the Yavama, does the other have to go through Halitza, or is his bond now eliminated? His bond is now eliminated, right? So if there are two surviving brothers, and the Yavama, it could go to either one. The mitzvah we learn is for the eldest brother to do it, but if the younger brother does it, then he acquires her as his wife. Or if he performs Chalitza, they go their separate ways, and the other brother is fully released and has no obligation in that situation. And finally, Sharon, if there are no sister issues, and a man has two co-wives who are both left childless when the husband dies, are both wives entitled to yibum? No, right? No. Both have the possibility of yibum, but only one of them can perform yibum, right? And we saw that, we had that ruling earlier, where it says that he shall build up his brother's house. The Yavam shall build up his brother's house, not shall build up his brother's houses, right? And in the Torah, someone's house means his wife, the family home that they build together. So if the man happened to have two wives, it's like he has two houses, but only one of them is going to get built up. So, who's going to choose which of the wives is going to get the opportunity to perform yibum? Like if they both want to do it, I guess it would be up to the surviving, the Yavam, the brother that they come before. And this is that question where if, so only one of those wives is supposed to perform yibum, and once that happens, the other one is released. But what happens if there were two brothers and there were two wives? Now we know that one brother cannot marry two of those wives. I think everybody knew that. But what if there were two surviving brothers and there were two wives of the brother that died who were not sisters? So there's not that sister issue. And these two brothers just stepped in before the court told them don't do this and married those two wives. Now, they weren't supposed to do that, but is that one of those cases where we allow them to remain together, or to preclude mistakes of this kind in the future, do we force them both to divorce or one of them to divorce? I don't know. We haven't had that case yet, and it's a really good question, Sharon, so maybe we'll get the answer on a future page. That's what I've got for us today. With God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow for page